Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sahabat Takwa Channel rahimakumullah, berikut ini adalah cuplikan sebuah masjid menyelamatkan korban dari kebakaran.
Hello Muslim friends in the world. That morning the skies over Beijing were clear. The usual hustle and bustle of the city, with the sounds of cars and footsteps of pedestrians, felt different. The wind blew stronger than usual, carrying a strange scent, something unexplainable. But no one could have predicted that this would be a sign of something big and terrifying. In a crowded corner of the city, a terrible fire erupted. It started so suddenly, spreading quickly like a giant serpent devouring everything in its path. Within minutes, a small flame turned into a massive inferno that consumed every building it touched. Skyscrapers, homes, and shops along the main streets of Beijing were burned to the ground in the blink of an eye. From a distance, people began to notice the thick smoke covering the sky. As they drew closer, they saw the fire had already taken over the main roads, rapidly spreading with terrifying speed. Like something unstoppable, the flames devoured every house in its way. Firefighters worked tirelessly, but it seemed like they were powerless against the raging beast of flames. Yet there was one place that remained eerily calm, despite the chaos surrounding it. The White Mosque, a well-known landmark in Beijing, stood tall amidst the panic. Its majestic white structure seemed like a contrast to the inferno raging around it. Survivors fleeing the fire paused for a moment, looking at the mosque in disbelief. They couldn't believe their eyes. The mosque appeared to be protected by an unseen force. Those nearby shouted, trying to inform others running in panic. "The mosque, it's not burning!" they cried, though their voices were almost drowned out by the deafening roar of the fire. But the truth was clear. The White Mosque, which should have been among the first to fall to the flames, remained intact, untouched by the fire that surrounded it. The fire continued to destroy buildings nearby with unbelievable force. On one side, a bustling market was reduced to an ocean of flames. On the other, the modest homes of the city's residents were consumed in seconds. Panic swept through the streets as people fled for their lives, leaving everything behind in the face of the blaze. Yet in the midst of this chaos, the White Mosque stood unaffected, as if it were an island in the middle of a storm, unshaken by the fire. Despite the flames being only a few meters away from its gates, the mosque remained untouched. The morning sunlight, now filtering through the darkened sky, illuminated the dome of the mosque, making it shine even more brightly, adding to its otherworldly aura. The survivors gathered around the mosque, staring at it in awe and confusion. How could this be? The flames were so close, so strong, yet the mosque stood firm. Some tried to explain the occurrence with logic, but no explanation seemed satisfactory. For those who believed in a higher power, it was undeniably a miracle. When firefighters arrived at the scene, they too stood in silence at the sight. They worked to save the buildings around them, but they couldn't ignore the fact that the White Mosque remained unscathed. "How is this possible?" one of the firefighters asked his colleague, his gaze fixed on the mosque, which seemed to be shielded from the fire. Outside the mosque, evacuees began to gather, whispering among themselves, sharing what they had witnessed. "This isn't a coincidence," said an elderly man with a trembling voice. "This is the protection of a higher power. This mosque is being watched over." As the firefighters continued their work, a sense of calm began to settle around the mosque. People didn't just find shelter here, they found peace. They realized that, amidst the destruction, there was still hope, and it was embodied in the White Mosque. The fire that consumed Beijing had not just brought destruction, it had also opened the eyes of many to the reality that something greater than them was at work. The White Mosque had survived the flames, and it had become a symbol of protection and faith in a time of crisis. The events unfolding were not just about the fire and the destruction it caused, they were about something far deeper, the power of faith and the reminder that there are forces beyond our understanding that protect us when all seems lost. And the White Mosque, untouched by the fire, was a living testament to that truth. The Great Fire that ravaged Beijing had altered the city's landscape in mere hours. From a distance, the thick black smoke enveloping the sky looked like a dark cloud, blocking out the sun. Survivors of the blaze gathered in shelters, their faces filled with fear and confusion. They spoke of one thing that was beyond explanation: the White Mosque. As the fire spread and consumed the city, the news of the mosque's miraculous survival traveled quickly. In the midst of the chaos, more and more people were drawn to the mosque, not just for refuge, but to witness the unbelievable. They had to see for themselves. How could it be that the mosque, surrounded by flames, was untouched? As groups of people gathered around the White Mosque, many were taken aback by its serene presence amid the devastation. It wasn't just a place of worship anymore. It had become something far more profound. The mosque, with its towering white dome, stood as a sharp contrast to the inferno raging just meters away. The flames had devoured everything in its path, yet the mosque remained standing, as if it were protected by some unseen force. People stopped in their tracks, stunned by what they were seeing. "It's impossible," said a young woman, her voice trembling. "How is it still standing? The fire is everywhere, but this mosque, it's completely safe." A quiet murmur spread among the crowd, and the word miracle began to slip from their lips. "It must be a sign," whispered an elderly man, "a sign from above that this place is sacred." The survivors who had sought refuge there weren't the only ones who marveled at the scene. Even people who had not witnessed the fire firsthand began to arrive, drawn by the growing rumors of the mosque's survival. They came not only to find safety, but to see the divine protection that everyone was talking about. Among the crowd was a group of young people who had narrowly escaped the fire. They stood quietly in front of the mosque, staring at its glowing white dome. One of them, a young man who had always been skeptical about religion, found himself speechless. For years he had questioned his faith, unable to believe in miracles. But standing here now, amidst the wreckage of the city, he began to feel something he couldn't explain. "This is different," he said, his voice soft. "I don't understand it, but there's something about this place. It's like it's being protected." Nearby, a local scholar who had taken refuge in the mosque was moved by what he saw. He had spent his life studying the teachings of faith, and this event struck him deeply. "This is not just about fire and buildings," the scholar said softly. "This is about divine will. This mosque is a symbol of protection, a reminder that faith can shield us from the storms of this world." The people gathered around the mosque began to reflect on the significance of the event. It was not just a fire that had ravaged the city. It was a test of faith, of belief in something greater than themselves. As they looked at the mosque, they began to realize that what they were witnessing was not a coincidence. It was a message of hope, faith, and divine protection. The more people gathered, the more they began to feel the peace that emanated from the mosque. It wasn't just the physical safety they found in its walls, but something deeper, a sense of reassurance and comfort in a time of chaos. Many of them found themselves praying quietly, grateful for the protection the mosque symbolized. Even those who did not consider themselves religious could not deny the strange sense of calm they felt standing before it. The news of the White Mosque's miraculous survival soon spread beyond Beijing, reaching people far and wide. Reports of the fire and the mosque's untouched state became a symbol of faith that transcended borders. People from all over the world were drawn to the story, many seeking to witness the miracle for themselves. But while the crowd marveled at the mosque's survival, a deeper question lingered in the minds of many. Why had this mosque been spared? Why had it stood when everything else around it had burned? Was it a divine intervention, a sign, or was there something else at play that no one could understand? For some, the fire and the mosque's protection represented more than just a miraculous event. It was a reminder that in the darkest times, there was always hope. There was always a light shining through the darkness, no matter how deep the shadows. For others, it was a call to strengthen their faith, to believe in something greater than themselves. And for those who had already been believers, it was an affirmation that faith could indeed move mountains, or in this case, protect a sacred place from the worst disaster the city had ever seen. As the days passed and the fire was eventually extinguished, the White Mosque continued to stand as a beacon of hope and divine protection. For many, it had become more than just a place of worship. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of destruction, something sacred could remain untouched. And so, the story of the White Mosque and its miraculous survival spread far and wide, inspiring not only the people of Beijing, but the world. The mosque was no longer just a building. It had become a living testament to the power of faith, the strength of belief, and the undeniable presence of divine protection in the midst of trials. As the weeks passed, Beijing began to rebuild. The fires had left scars across the city, with entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Yet amid the destruction, the White Mosque stood untouched, an unshaken monument of hope. The fire had ravaged everything in its path, but the mosque had remained a symbol of something greater, something inexplicable to many. The survivors who had sought refuge within the mosque's walls spoke of it with reverence. They had not just found shelter from the flames, they had found peace. The chaos of the outside world, with its constant reminders of disaster, seemed to fade away the moment they stepped into the mosque. There, in the quiet corners of the prayer hall, many felt as though they were in a place that was somehow removed from the devastation around them. It was as if the mosque itself was a sanctuary, not only from the physical fire, but from the despair that had settled in the hearts of those who had lost everything. It wasn't just the survivors who felt this profound sense of calm. Word of the mosque's survival had spread far and wide, reaching people from all corners of the world. Visitors began arriving, not only to witness the mosque, but to experience the inexplicable peace it seemed to offer. Some came with skepticism, their minds filled with questions, while others arrived with hearts full of faith, ready to witness a divine miracle. People came from all walks of life, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, old and young, religious and secular. Each one had their own reason for coming, but all left with something profound, something intangible. They felt as though they had been touched by something greater than themselves. Some left with renewed faith, while others were simply in awe of the inexplicable protection the mosque had received. Among those who visited was a young woman who had lost her family in the fire. Her heart was broken, and she had wandered through the city, aimlessly searching for solace. When she heard the story of the mosque that had survived the flames, she felt compelled to see it for herself. When she arrived, she sat quietly in the mosque's prayer hall, her eyes filled with grief. But as she sat in silence, something changed. A sense of peace washed over her, a calmness she hadn't felt since the tragedy. She didn't know how to explain it, but she felt that her loss had been acknowledged, that there was still hope in the world. "I came here broken," she later told a fellow visitor, "but somehow being here has made me feel whole again. I don't have all the answers, but I know that this place, this mosque, is special. It's like it has a purpose, a meaning that I can't fully understand, but it's enough to make me believe again." Her words echoed the feelings of many who came to the mosque in search of peace. For those who had faced the worst of what life had to offer, the mosque had become more than just a building. It had become a sign that even in the darkest of times, there was a light that could guide them through the darkness. The miracle of the mosque's survival was not just a physical one, it was a spiritual one. It reminded people that, no matter how dire the circumstances, faith could shield them from despair. The local scholars and imams who visited the mosque regularly began to reflect on what had transpired. They spoke of the divine protection that the mosque had received, pointing to it as a testament to the power of faith and prayer. "This is a lesson for all of us," one scholar said during a sermon. "In times of hardship, when we feel lost or abandoned, we must remember that there is always a force greater than us that is watching over us. This mosque is proof that with faith, we can endure anything." The scholars also warned against seeing the miracle as a simple act of divine favor. "It is not just about the mosque," one imam explained. "It is about what it represents. The mosque represents faith, resilience, and the unwavering belief that, in the face of adversity, we are not alone. The fire may have taken many lives and homes, but it could not take away our hope." As the mosque became a symbol of resilience, people from all over China and even from other countries began to make pilgrimages to see it. The once quiet streets around the mosque became filled with visitors who were drawn to the miracle. Some came to pray, others to witness the wonder, but all left changed in some way. They had seen firsthand that miracles were not just stories passed down through generations. They were real. They were living, breathing reminders that faith and hope could move mountains. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. While the rest of Beijing slowly began to rebuild its physical structures, the White Mosque continued to serve as a pillar of spiritual strength. It wasn't just the city's citizens who found solace there. Visitors from around the world found themselves touched by its presence. It became a sanctuary for all those who needed a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was still something worth believing in. And as the years passed, the story of the White Mosque's miraculous survival became a legend, passed from one generation to the next. It wasn't just the story of a mosque that survived a fire. It was the story of a community, a city, and a world that had learned to find strength in their faith. The mosque had become more than just a building. It had become a symbol of hope for all who believed that, even in the darkest moments, there was a light that would never fade. The White Mosque.
MasyaAllah, tabarakallah. Benar kejadian yang sangat heroik sekali ya. Semoga saja cuplikan kali ini bisa menambah wawasan dan ketakwaan keimanan kita kepada Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Terima kasih sudah menonton. Sampai jumpa kembali di postingan berikutnya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Masya Allah, tabarakallah, benar-benar kisah dan kejadian yang sangat heroik sekali ya. Semoga saja cuplikan kali ini bisa menambah wawasan dan ketakwaan keimanan kita kepada Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Terima kasih telah menonton. Sampai jumpa kembali di postingan berikutnya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.